Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Montu's investor webinar for the equity crowdfunding campaign on Birchal. My name is Claire. I am the Senior Campaign Manager here at Birchal, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Chris from Montu, the CEO and founder.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
Absolute pleasure. The first thing I'd like to do today is to acknowledge traditional owners from where I am beaming in from. I am beaming in from the Wangapuan people of the Nijayam Nation up in Cobar, New South Wales. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. And I'm so excited to be joined by Chris for this webinar. We're going to learn all about Montu, back for its second raise on Birchal. Incredible growth, 1,000% growth since you last joined the platform. A record-breaking raise in late 2020. You're back again. Your expression of interest numbers are looking absolutely astounding. You know, lots of interest in this campaign. You know, for those that come back for second campaigns, you know, to capitalize on that growth and go into the future, it's awesome to see that your investor network and database is really, really pumped for this second round and to see this company, you know, career into the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Chris in a sec to learn a little more about Montu, the market, the space that we're in. And we'll run that for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then if you've got questions, it is a really interesting industry and it's really fantastic what Montu are doing. So if you've got a question, please pop it in the Q&A box down the bottom. And we'll get to your questions, at sort of 12:15. So Chris, over to you. Tell us all about Montu and some of the incredible growth you've seen since your last raise with us.
Yes, thanks so much, Claire. Yeah, certainly. I think, so probably for the next 10, 15 minutes, I'll just give a quick intro for everybody, for everybody's benefit, just as to what the medicinal cannabis market is about, why it has been growing so fast across the world, what we are doing within the market, recent progress, and then I think that gives a good baseline for everybody to ask questions thereafter. So I think as an intro, like how did we get into the space? It was really following the Canadian and the US markets. Those two markets have seen tremendous growth over the last couple of years. Legislation was a bit faster than elsewhere in the world. And so ever since legislation has changed, patient numbers went through the roof, and that got us really intrigued as to why is this happening? What is this about? You know, medicinal cannabis, everyone kind of knows this as a drug, but really it can be used as a therapeutic good. And I think what's really fantastic to see and really intrigued me to go into this space is that it is really superior compared to many of the medications that are in market today. And what I mean by that is that because it's has a much lower side effect profile than traditional medication, it oftentimes gives people the quality of life back, right? So the biggest problem with chronic pain patients or chronic conditions in general is that patients oftentimes don't really have a solution to them. And so they have to take medication for all their life. And so what you really want to do is that, well, you can't really fix that problem. You want to at least give them the quality of life back. And because with all those side effects, you know, oftentimes people can't really sleep well, they can't really go to work, they can't really, you know, just enjoy life really. And so medicinal cannabis really plays the role there to be able to reduce that side effect profile. And so people can at least, you know, live their life while living with a chronic condition. And the application is extremely broad. So I mentioned already, pain is probably one of the biggest sectors, but it also works for mental health, things like anxiety, depression, insomnia, epilepsy. So as you can see, these are conditions that pretty much in the modern world, everyone is affected by in some shape or form. So a huge market, huge application. And then obviously, you know, with changing legislation, there's the extreme sort of medical cases, but then obviously there's also a wellness market and eventually a recreational market that will open up over time. So significant potential into the future. For us, maybe now talking a bit more about the Australian market, what has happened here. Very interesting. In 2016, legislation changed. It took a couple of years until around 2019 for it to really streamline in a way that it was efficient for doctors to prescribe. And that's really the moment at which we have seen the first patients come through. And from a low base, I think in 2019, it was around 3,000 approvals that we saw, to very significant growth over the last 2 years, where we now are at 170,000 approvals. So astounding what has happened in just 2 years. And pretty much since we entered the market, we have been very much in a front seat to see what is happening. In terms of the business model, we then started looking at, okay, this is certainly an interesting market. So what can we do? Where should we play, and what's sort of the most value add, I guess, for the market? Where the friction points? I think the main distinction I would probably make is between anything that happens on the cultivation side, so early harvesting, the selling of seeds, manufacturing, extraction, down to sort of import-export type of distribution on a large scale. We felt that that area was somewhat interesting still in 2019, but really over the last 2 years, so much has happened across the globe. Legislation has changed across 50 countries. And so there's so many countries in the world where cultivation is now happening, that we felt it becomes over time a very commoditized business model. And so really only the people that are operating at a very large scale with large infrastructure, large facilities will win the market. And then obviously also the countries that are probably in more low cost environments where labor is cheaper and so forth will probably be able to be more price competitive. So it was an area that we felt other people can do a really good job there, but it's probably not for us, and it's probably not kind of where we want to play and where our strength lies. Which then brings us to the second part, or the downstream of that supply chain, which is everything around how do we give patients access? How do we educate doctors around this? How do we build a local distribution network that reduces all the friction around regulation, around access to these medications, about dispensing processes with pharmacies, and so forth and so forth. And so the starting point for us was educating doctors, because that's still, until today, probably the biggest barrier to this industry. It's just that regulation has already changed. The processes are relatively streamlined in the back end. So the last barrier is really a doctor that has to make the decision, do I want to prescribe or not? And the medical community is relatively conservative, rightly so. And so it takes a very long time to get to people, to prescribe on a very active manner. And they try kind of on a very sort of on a slow pace. So what we have done is initially educate doctors about what it can do, where it can play, and build a network of doctors that prescribe. But then also realize that over the last probably 12 months to 18 months, there's more and more doctors that really dedicate their time to this, that have realized, okay, this really works. This is really rewarding. I can see there's so many patients I could never help before, and now I have an option for them. I want to do more of that. And those doctors ended up in a situation where it was, from an infrastructure and process perspective, very difficult for them, because the typical clinic is not set up for this. There's still additional forms and regulations around getting this prescription out to patients. And so what we did is basically started building infrastructure that connects us to a network of pharmacies that can dispense these products, infrastructure that helps the doctors in terms of a patient management system to be very efficient in getting all the information into a system that then connects to other brands or product providers, so that these medications then can go to a pharmacy. Infrastructure in terms of, from a patient-facing perspective, things like telehealth, online forms, to make sure that with the 5%, and right now it's only 5% of doctors prescribing, unfortunately still, that we at least make sure that within those 5%, the ones that are prescribing at high volume, we give them the biggest impact they can have, and we make them able to reach the entire country. And that's really what telehealth has helped with, to build a platform and to give access to everybody to those high prescribing doctors, which obviously also from a knowledge perspective and quality perspective can give much better advice, because now they have seen thousands of patients already, versus your local GP might have never prescribed or might have prescribed once or twice, but certainly is not at the level of some of those high volume prescribers. And really, as a result of that, and really being extremely patient-centric and trying to understand the entire process that a patient has to go through, minimizing all friction points along the way, we build an ecosystem that works end-to-end, makes it very seamless for patients to get access to these doctors in the first place, and ultimately to the medication thereafter. Everything is home delivered. Everything can be accessed through telehealth from the comfort of their home. So especially important for people with chronic pain, for example, who are not as mobile, who have difficulties, traveling to the pharmacy or to the doctor. It makes it really, really simple and really easy. And that's really, I think, is a result of the growth that we have seen. Patient demand is already there. We know that there's 600,000 patients out there right now in the illicit market accessing these medications for therapeutic purposes. And so if you can imagine, there's 600,000 that go through the hassle of trying to get this through the illicit market. Imagine how many are there that have played with the thought of getting access to them, but just waiting for a legal option, an easier option to get access to those. So I think that's kind of what we have seen there, for that demand was met with our solution, and accordingly 1,000% growth in the last 12 months, now to a $10 million run rate, which makes us one of the largest players in the market. and that all in a profitable way, because we have been very prudent in the way where we apply our resources. And I think ultimately it's also a lot of organic growth there. So from a marketing perspective, we didn't really have to put too much money into marketing or effort into marketing as yet. A lot of this happened organically. We get referrals from doctors, patients speak to other patients, and so that's kind of the result of all that we see that significant growth.
Awesome. So just to recap then, on last year's capital raise, record-breaking $2 million raised. What did those funds go towards in terms of growing the business? We've heard amazing growth, but I know a few investors are really interested to know how those funds were deployed and what sort of happened in the business after that capital raise. Now you're coming back to the market because you're solidifying your place in this growing market, and we'd love to know, what your growth plans are from here.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the main fund allocation was in a couple of things. One was definitely the technology side. So that's why I mentioned we really spent a lot of time understanding what the market needs and what technology solutions needed to be there. We could not find those solutions in any shape or form really tailored to the cannabis market. So therefore, we built them from scratch ourselves. That's things like the PMS, the patient management system, that our fulfillment system in the back end. So all of these things are connected through technology, which make it very seamless. And that obviously was a big effort of ours. The other part was really in terms of growing the team. A big part of growth for our team was the patient care team. What that is, it's really important as part of this entire equation of giving streamlined access, because you have so few doctors that have the knowledge, you want to maximize their capacity. And that means, how do you then ensure that patients have good touch points with you and transparency along the way throughout the entire journey? So what we did is we very actively trained a team of nurses, which is our patient care team, which basically follows patients from the very beginning till the very end, does all the pre-assessment, goes through all the questions that patients have before and after, to really maximize the capacity that we have with our doctors, so that we take all the other things away ahead of time, and again make sure that patients have good touch point along the way. So that's sort of the team. And then obviously next to that, there was increase in marketing and operations and tech. So all across, we had to increase our resources to make sure that we were able to keep up with the demand and the growth that we saw months on months. And I think lastly, it was also a lot around supply chain. So ordering processes, it's a very regulated market. Things take a very long time. So definitely something that was always a headache for us was, how do we make sure that without eating too much into working capital, we have a good amount of stock and inventory at all times. And I think just the funding allowed us to just have a bit more flexibility, which was incredibly important, because if we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have not stocked up as much, and we would just simply not be able to meet the demand that we have seen over the last couple of months.
And for this raise now, what, with the funds raised, what's the minimum that you're looking to raise in this particular round, and what are the plans for Montu over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so for us, the focus is as such not fundamentally changed. I think it's still going to go a lot into the technology side. There's so many more things that we can do. We are absolute perfectionists when it comes to the patient experience. And so there's many more activities and I think linking points, especially on the pharmacy side, when it comes to transparency of really showing people where is their medication at any point in time, and who is the touch point at any point in time. There's so many more things that we can do, as well as the functionality on the platform on the telehealth side. The patient care team is going to continue to grow. We actively hire every single month a few more nurses, because that's just what's needed in order to meet the demand. And in the same way, I think marketing is going to be our biggest focus. As I said, so far we have grown, and it's really incredible to think that we have grown so fast and at that level without having really done too much active marketing. And that all happened through referral channels and organic traffic and a bit of digital marketing. There's so much more we can do, and that's certainly resources we want to build. We want to have a very diversified marketing approach to market, just to make sure that patients are aware. Because right now what we see is that once patients are aware that there is an option, we know they're out there, we know they're thinking about it, they just don't know, and they're always surprised at how easy it actually is, and how many doctors are there that can help instantaneously. Because bear in mind, many patients have spoken to the doctor, and the doctor said, I don't know anything about it, it's probably too early for this. So that's the general perception still for 95% of doctors, and therefore also 95% of patients. So very, very important that we create awareness around this, and with that continue growing the business. In terms of minimum, we set the minimum at 500K, maximum still to be defined. We have a good ballpark in mind, but obviously we wait until the end of the UI to give a fixed number through the offer documents. But certainly, as you mentioned, I think based on the demand we have seen, based on the traction we had, we certainly see extremely positive feedback from our existing investors and others that have followed us throughout the journey. So very confident in the demand in that upcoming round.
Yeah, fantastic. And, you know, that's been such a really great overview of Montu and the growth that you've seen and what the business exists to do. If you have questions, please start putting them in the Q&A box and we can start working our way through the questions. I do have a few more questions for you, Chris. I'm interested, I've seen on the Montu website, the Alternaleaf brand, and there is a network around Montu. I'd love to know how Alternaleaf, you know, feeds into this network that you're building.
So Alternaleaf is really our patient-facing side. I think what is really what we realized, we started out with the Montu brand, which was really more a B2B brand towards doctors, educating doctors, building infrastructure for doctors. But as I said, over the last 12 months, we made that shift that we realized there is a patient demand that is looking for these medications, these treatment areas, and with the infrastructure that we have on the Monte side, we needed to find a way to connect those two. So Alternaleaf, in short, is our telehealth platform. That's the place where patients would go to get connected to a doctor, and that is directly connected to our Monto backend, which then feeds into the different brands, the supply side, and the dispensing side with pharmacies. So it all becomes sort of a very seamless connection. Here, very important to say, and it's just I'm addicted to look at our reviews and see you know, what people have to say about us. But what is very positive on our end to see is that in just such a short period of time since we activated reviews, we now have more than 500 5-star reviews for our service. Because again, I think what we keep hearing and keep seeing is patients are just very excited over the fact that it's just so easy and so streamlined. And obviously, many have really, really good effects from this medication. And so hearing things like, you know, I can finally sleep for the first time in years, or things that, you know, my pain is finally under control and I can go back to my favorite hobby. Those are kind of just things that are extremely rewarding for the team and for us in general to, you know, to know that we're on the right track with what we're doing.
And I'm interested to know a little bit more about the Montu product range. So is there plans to extend the product range into oils, further tablets, powders, or where is it at the moment? And is there plans to expand and go into different revenue streams?
Yeah, so here we've also changed a little bit our strategy. So initially, when we came into market, there was simply very limited product available. There was no recognized brand that doctors were loyal to, or that was recognized as a high quality brand. So we came into market with Circle, with our own Circle brand. And the reason for that is just because, you know, we had contacts with a number of cultivators, manufacturers that we felt really positive about. We didn't know what the other brands are doing, where they source their products from. It's somewhat of an opaque market. And so therefore we felt more comfortable going with our own brands, where we know where the products are coming from. They're formulated according to our standards. And we know we're aligned with the people that produce them. So that was sort of the starting point for us. But we also recognized that once we created the Alternaleaf platform and we had all these high prescribing doctors on the platform, that over the last 2 years, a lot has happened. More products entered the market. There are a lot of recognized and leading brands in market. And for us to really allow a doctor to prescribe whatever is the best treatment for that specific patient and to create a really personalized treatment plan, we need to integrate these other brands. And so what we started doing over the last probably 6 months is adding a lot of other brands onto the platform, so that really when patients come to the platform, they're not just restricted to our brands, but really whatever the doctor feels is the best product for that specific patient can be prescribed. And so players like Canatrack, Little Green Pharma, and others, ANTG, are on our platform now and available to patients. What that means for us as well is that formats, formulations, all of these things are very fluid. They change on a very frequent basis. There are different preferences, different prescribing habits, different patient demand based on, you know, information that comes out through clinical trials, etc. So from our perspective as well, it's very hard to keep up with that. So being able to work with other brands and extending very significantly our range into, for example, with Canatrack, they have a huge flower range. We at the moment have one flower. And so, you know, we're much more able, by combining those, to to offer a much wider selection. There's now things like even medicated gummies available. So it really sort of, broadens the range of what we can do and what we can offer, and what's the preference in market. And as that continues to change, our approaches, we'll listen to the market, and we'll work with people that have that offering, or we create that offering through our own brand.
And are Montu services available across Australia, or is it limited to certain states only?
No, it's across Australia. So that's, as I said, that's the other big advantage. So when we started working with doctors across the country, while you would end up having a doctor in every major state, you still might be very far away from where your respective patients are. So with that telehealth solution, you now basically can cover everybody into the most remote areas, and that's really a huge advantage, especially for people in regional areas that normally don't have access to these sort of more innovative medications.
And what do you find are the biggest risks going forward for Montu as you grow?
I think we are very aware of general business risk, and so I would say we operate actively into direction to mitigate those. I would say at this point, it's regulation is a risk. I don't see it as a significant risk, because I think regulation goes in our favor, if anything. Like we have seen over the last 2 years, things are progressing very well. I think the TGA overall is very positive towards these medications. They're cautious, but every other month we see an improvement here and there, and it's on a state basis as well. So I think that's one obvious risk, that is that as that changes, we might have to adapt our processes or structures. But I think it's not a huge one. Inventory, as I said, or supply chain in general, it's still, because it takes such a long time to produce these medications, then they have to go through certain studies and then stability tests and so forth, which takes more time. And then they need to be sourced, and there's import-export permits, etc. attached to it. So there's a long process to it. So with especially a market that grows very, very fast, you need to always plan ahead, and sometimes to a level that you might not actually have, because it's just so far in the future until you get these products. So therefore, again, the decision to work with other partners to diversify on our side, our manufacturers and suppliers that we work with, but also working with other brands, so mitigated that further, and it allows us to have more flexibility. I think I would probably say those are probably the biggest one, and then there's obviously any general operations risk that key personnel that might fluctuate at this early stage when you have a small team. Obviously that would impact the business, but all of those things I think we again mitigate by having a really amazing vision and a lot of people that are very much invested in what we do and have a great culture. And we hope to keep all of those great people with us.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I might hop now to some of the crowd questions that have come through. So I apologise to everyone and to you, Chris, if they're a bit random coming through. I'm just going to ask them as they've entered. The first question is, other than telehealth, will Montu access or join or influence the existing online doctor/prescription services like Pilot, as another brand, for instance, or will you create your own version of this?
Influence was the question, if we influence them?
Other than telehealth, will you access, join, or influence the existing online doctor prescription services? So I think the question, there is a brand out there called Pilot, and I do apologize if I've got this brand wrong and what it does, but I believe it does prescribe men's health supplements online without actually needing to go to a doctor for that. I think I've got that brand right, and if I don't, please pop something in the chat and I'll correct myself. But it's another platform that's prescribing medication for patients in another realm. Will Montu ever look to access, join, or collaborate with these other platforms, or due to the nature of your industry, do you have to stay within your own platform?
I don't think we have to. I think there is, in the future, I think there's collaboration possible. I think in general, we're looking at partnerships and possible collaborations with the wider market. Having said that, as a young company, as a fast growing company, it's always a question of where do you allocate your resources to. We have learned the hard way through many previous businesses that staying very focused is probably the best option, at least in the beginning. And I think with the market potential that it has, with the customized infrastructure that we have built, we rather want to double down and really being customized to our patient group and patient cohort and really meet their needs to the best of our abilities before we branch out and become sort of more I guess, generic in our offering, because the market is quite specific. The processes in the backend are quite specific. So while there are other telehealth operators out there, they probably operate quite in a quite different way with quite different problem profiles than what we have. But obviously, from an awareness creation perspective, we're always a big fan of collaborating with others to make sure that awareness is there.
Awesome. The next question that's come through is a little bit about the financials and letting everyone that's attending the webinar or tuning in afterwards know, with the nature of these campaigns, we do release an offer document, which does include the company's most recently completed 12 months of financial statements, which includes profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flow, and statement of changes in equity. So the questions that are coming through on share price and the terms of the offer, all of that will be included in the offer document. The question that's come through has been asking about your turnover for the most recent financial period and the net result for the same period. Chris, if you want to give a high-level summary of basically the company's performance for this, otherwise we can wait till the offer document is released to answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think all the more sort of detailed information will obviously be in the offer document. I think people can see kind of exactly unit economics and net profit and so forth. I think all I will say is speak a little bit to the revenue side. As I mentioned, we've obviously grown extremely fast over the last 12 months. So if you look at existing run rate, actually we will also include the October numbers, which are the most recent numbers, into the offer document. And while we currently go out, and I think everywhere it says $10 million run rate, we're now actually looking at the October numbers. We're already at the $14 million run rate. So it gives you a bit of an understanding that on a month-by-month basis, we grow 40–60% even. And I think therefore, what we have seen happening in terms of the unit economics is we have been relatively stable with our cost structure. Marketing costs have been pretty much in check. Resources such as human resources have increased slightly because of increased patient care team and so forth. But overall, the reason why we turned the business profitable is because of that function of relatively stable unit economics and fixed cost, while our revenue stream has gone and continues to go up very, very actively over the last couple of months or a year. And so, yeah, we continue seeing that trend moving forward. We'll see continued growth while being able to manage our cost structure very well.
Yeah, fantastic. The next question that's come through is, what is Montu's value proposition when coming up against competitors, and where do you see Montu sitting currently with respect to other competitors in the industry?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the cannabis market is an interesting one because it's a complete new industry that opened up after legalization, which is very different to any other industry where you typically have to compete against some incumbents. You have to try to catch market share away from someone else. Here, it's more the opposite problem where you can't do everything, right? There's just so many opportunities and so many ways you can play in this market that you have to define where is your focus area and do that extremely well. And I think that's kind of what allows you to win the market. And then you can afterwards, once you have created yourself in a certain place, you can then branch out into other things. So what we see in market is, while there's a lot of medical cannabis companies on a very high level, if you look into detail, everyone does slightly different things, has a slightly different positioning. There's a lot of people focusing on cultivation, building facilities, focusing on research, focusing on clinical trials. That's very, very different to what we do. That's, if anything, those will become partners of ours. So as I mentioned, someone like Little Green Pharma, for example, that is now working with us, or Canatrek, they're more focused on building facilities and having high quality products, and therefore need to focus on the research side, on the clinical trials to get that done. We then would operate and work with them to make that accessible through our distribution network. So in short, I guess on our end, what the differentiator is and what the different focus is that we have always focused on patient access. So the last bit of the supply chain that goes into thinking every single day about how do we make sure that this entire process is as frictionless as possible for patients, so that we ultimately own and manage that relationship, because we felt that that's one, where our expertise lies, two, where technology can play a really important part, which is something we're very familiar with, building tech-enabled businesses, and three, we feel that's where the long-term value is being created, because whoever has the closest relationship with the patient, has the understanding as to where the market should go, has the distribution capabilities, and then is able to work with all these other players that do other things in the market.
And a question's come through about some, insights into, again, those margins and how it compares with other competitors. I imagine that, for many private companies, that information is private, but I'm sure you can shed some light on the rate that Montu is growing in compared to other competitors in the market.
Yes. The reality is, I have not seen a company grow by 1,000% over the last 12 months. So I think it is fair to say that we're probably the fastest growing cannabis company in market. The market obviously as a whole is growing fast, and so it is not uncommon for many players in market to see triple digit percentages like 100%, 300%. So we do see definitely that the entire market is going up, which again, coming back to my point of it's a different beast altogether because we are not really competing over the same market. We're all growing into a new market that didn't exist before. Everyone has a specific focus area, attracts a slightly different subgroup of that market, and we're all kind of growing together. In terms of profitability or efficiency of resource allocation, I can obviously, and it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but I can only compare to the listed companies, which obviously have oftentimes very different cost structure due to regulatory reasons. But I can definitely say that looking at marketing expenses, education expenses, personnel expenses, we are significantly leaner. We have been very, very focused on being very conservative with our capital and focusing really on the things that give us the highest ROI. And I think that's the reason why we have achieved very significant growth, while at the same time being very cost effective in that growth. And I think that's something that really sets us apart.
And that's the question that has come through about, the difference in your value proposition in relation to those other Australian cannabis telehealth providers. And do you believe that's because you focus so much on patient access in addition to the reasons that you just mentioned?
Yeah, that's right. I think what we have learned outside of the cannabis market, but across any businesses that we have built in the past, if you focus on the customer or the patient in this case, then and you make sure that their experience is as positive as possible, then ultimately success will come and growth will come, because patients have choice. Everything is transparent. Everything is digital these days. People can see the feedback. They can speak to others, and so managing that very well and listening to the market and adapting accordingly has really been I think a differentiator of ours. And I think again it roots much deeper than this. I think it's not just to say we're patient centric, but it roots down to who are the people that you hire, what kind of culture do you build internally. It's something that is hard to replicate and something also sometimes hard to put in words because it's intangible, but it is there and it's not noticeable over time as you start seeing better success than others. And I think that's something that we just learned over many, many decades.
And as the business grows, are there plans to expand into other jurisdictions or other countries as well? One particular investor has asked about, expansion to New Zealand, for instance, or where does Montu have their sights set?
Yeah, certainly. This is certainly something, again, so these tech-enabled platform businesses is something we love as a business model, because once you have the infrastructure built, it's very easily replicatable. So it becomes a very scalable business model, not just locally, but internationally. We have looked at many markets, and what we found is that while regulation is slightly different from one market to another, you can definitely very easily adjust our existing model to another market. New Zealand is a good example, very, very similar regulation. The same model would work in the same exact way. In fact, New Zealand was always a market that we looked very closely at, obviously also due to proximity. So in terms of distribution agreements, we have them already in place. In terms of an understanding as to how we want to enter the markets, then we started the effort of changing or adjusting our technology platform in a way that would be suitable to the New Zealand market. So all of these things are already underway. We have an entity in place that is ready to go. So that's certainly our next immediate market. But having said that, as I said, there's 50 plus countries across the world that have legalized cannabis already. Patient numbers are not where they are in Australia today, but we know this is just a matter of time. And so once we start seeing those markets develop, it would be a logical thing to start looking into how we can expand into those.
And a question that's come through is, as Montu expands, are you planning to cultivate it all yourself? I know in your presentation you were mentioning that that's a very well-serviced area of the industry. The questions are coming through, you know, do you plan to cultivate yourself? Do you get your source product from the one supplier or maker, or do you get from a range of different suppliers, and how you plan to manage that ongoing?
Yeah. So the answer is we definitely would look more into the future, into possibilities to further integrate our supply chain. We kind of go the other route. We don't want to do everything in the beginning. We want to be very focused, do something really well, build the brand up that way, have a very clear proposition, and then look at what are adjacent areas that could help us improve our unit economics, improve our service, improve the business as a whole. And so cultivation could make sense once you have a critical scale. Once you start realizing, okay, with that scale, I could build or buy this facility and integrate it, and that would, optimize our supply times. It would optimize our quality assurance. It would optimize our ability to provide lower cost products. Those kind of considerations would then make totally sense, and we would definitely look at it. Having said that, I don't think that's something that it's not for the next 12 months, probably maybe kind of 24 months and plus, because there's just so much more we can do with the existing business model. We're just really scratching the surface. And I think it would be wrong to now start looking too broadly when there's so much more opportunity right in front of us. So I forgot the second part of the question.
The second part of the question, because I'm bundling two questions together, would be the supply of Montu's products. You're mentioning, obviously, on your platform, you have a range of collaborations with other brands on the Montu platform, but also Circle as Montu's own brand itself. Do you source it from one supplier? I'm not sure if you can tell us who the supplier is or what it's like in that industry, or if you get it from multiple different suppliers across the world.
No, we receive that from different suppliers. So same logic here. It's rare that you find one supplier that does everything well. So as we started going through our considerations, what are the types of oils, types of formulation, types of formats, like into dried flour, for example, that we need. It's rare that you would find one supplier that does exactly what you need across the entire range of things. And there's obviously, it changes. We keep introducing new products. So right now, we have a major Canadian supplier that we started out with since 2019. We then had an addition of Medifarm Labs, which is a supplier here in Australia. And we now have also 2 more suppliers out of Europe. So again, as opportunistically as we start engaging with more partners across the world, and as I said, some of these partners really only developed very recently. It's sort of over the last 2 years. Medifarm Lab didn't exist 2 years ago in Australia. So many of these offerings and opportunities only come up as we speak. There's certainly more opportunities here in Australia as more and more facilities are coming up, which will be nice to have local produced product, and obviously from a supply chain perspective makes things a lot easier. But at the same time, we see huge developments in Europe, and on the low cost side, we see things happening in Colombia, in Portugal, in even in Lesotho in Africa. So there's so many opportunities out there to focus on different value proposition, be it low cost, be it high quality, be it specific formulations, that we keep evaluating that space, and definitely have an interest in diversifying further our supply chain.
I'm aware that there are many questions coming through about the terms of the offer, ROI, comments about the ASX, which I am going to get to within the last 15 minutes of this presentation. I'm keen to sort of flesh out some more questions around the business model, make sure they are all addressed. A question has come through about if Australia follows in the footsteps of the US and Canada in terms of making recreational cannabis available. Do you see this as impacting your business, or do you think this is something that's going to be flexible and you can move with this development?
Definitely, yeah. As I mentioned early on, I think what you will see is it starts out extreme chronic condition, cancer patients. Now we're getting to a point where it broadens already in terms of the chronic conditions that are being taken into consideration and the severity of those conditions. Next step is wellness market. So, you get it at the pharmacy for muscle ache and other things, and maybe sleep problems. And then the logical step thereafter is going into recreational. And once the market and the regulators have gotten used to the idea that cannabis is not a harmful drug. So in that sense, yes, definitely will come. To the timeline, very hard to talk to that. Obviously, it depends entirely on the regulator and how fast we move. I think it probably happens faster than we think, just simply because we now have more and more precedents across the world where this already happened or where this is in the process of happening. Germany is discussing that at length, and that seems to be something that is going to be quite soon. Other countries in Europe as well discussing it. So I think, and obviously we have Canada and the US to look at as well. So I think definitely recreational is something that's coming in the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years. Also to Australia. In terms of what it means for our business, there's certainly an overlap. First and foremost, I think what we will see is that there will be increasing overlap between someone who is using that entirely for medical purposes and someone who is sort of maybe in between medical purposes, but also for recreational purpose over the weekend. So I think you will have that overlap in the first place, and then I think for us as a platform and as someone that listens to patient feedback and customer feedback in the future, it's definitely going to be sort of an evolution where we will find out, what's the best way to separate those two, and at what point in time, do we make that split? But obviously the platform and the engagement with the community already lends itself to offering something that is sensible for the community we're already engaging with.
In terms of the feedback from the community, one potential investor has written through and is interested to know, in terms of supply as Montu grows, you're mentioning that new markets will pop up around the world with lower labour costs. Is there plans or allowances within your business model to provide investors and customers assurances that your supplies will not be sourced from countries that are in breach of human rights conditions, or how do you go about, I suppose, assessing your suppliers before buying supply for them, for a range of things? I mean, you've mentioned a little bit about the quality of the product first and foremost, but are there other things that you're taking into consideration as well before working with a supplier?
Yeah, I think at this point, it wasn't the requirement to make that assessment in depth, because the reality was, until now, Canada was probably the only country that really had supply. So 90% of the world sources from Canada. I think it's only now starting to change. It's a bit early to say. I mean, certainly this is something that we would take into consideration. I think in general, we meet everyone that we have supply relationships with. We check out their facilities. We make sure that the conditions are to the standards that we need them to. So from that perspective, it's definitely something that would go into our due diligence. So far wasn't anything that, I guess, because it only recently is that, I'm not sure if there's anything happening in Lesotho at this point. I know there's projects coming up, but they're not live yet, or they're at very early stages. So I think at this point in time wasn't a consideration that we had to make, but certainly we make a very detailed due diligence before we get into business with anybody. Sorry, Claire, I can't hear you right now.
More mute, classic. I've got 2 more questions for you before we hop into the details of the offer and more information around the investment opportunity. Got 2 more questions to ask you. So the first question, I fully admit I don't really understand, but I think the person is, an operator in this space, and you'll be able to understand the question. But it's asking, in regards to scheduling, do you foresee cannabis being changed from S8 to S4 in the near to mid-term? Maybe just what is S8 and S4?
Yes,
I've not heard of this before.
Yeah, I'll explain it in a bit. So basically, you have 2 schedules, or soon 3 schedules of medication, depending on addiction profile, or in terms of how it's regulated and how it has to be protected. You have different schedules. Schedule 8 is it goes the higher the more regulation and the more strict it is. Currently, anything with THC is scheduled under S8. S4 is basically at this point in time only CBD isolates. So that means anything that has 98% CBD out of all cannabinoids. And then there is a discussion that those S4, or part of those S4 products, might go into S3 in the future, which is then over-the-counter pharmacies. So you could actually access them without having a prescription, but you can go to a pharmacy and get it through the pharmacy. That S8, so that's the THC containing products, will become S4. Possible. Again, I think it's a major step in terms of regulation. So I think it's definitely something that I would envision. I mean, again, on the path to wellness and to the path of ultimately recreational. I mean, that's sort of the steps that we would see, the gradual downscheduling of these medications. Again, in terms of timeline, it's very, very hard to say. I think we'll all be pleasantly surprised that it might happen faster than we think. But yeah, obviously up to the regulator ultimately.
And does Montu engage with the regulators at all on these products and sort of pushing the industry forward, or is it a bit more of an arm's length sort of relationship at the moment?
I would say yes and no. I mean, it's to be honest, the regulator hasn't. I don't feel that at this very moment, when you look at the potential of the market and what gets us to the next level, the regulator is probably not the biggest barrier, if that makes sense. And I think you can argue in different ways. Obviously, it would be great to have these things on the PBS and make them cheaper. And I think there's a lot of ways to make these products more accessible. But I think just in terms of giving people that want access to these medications better availability, I think really stigma and medical community being better educated around this is probably the biggest leap forward. If that were to happen, I think you could easily already start seeing this across many clinics in the country, despite obviously the higher cost and the regulation in terms of S8 versus S4. Again, I think that I'm losing the second part of the question.
No, I think that was pretty much the question. It was more about just the engagement that Montu has with regulators, and I think you very much.
Yeah, I think in that sense, I mean, we're very close when it comes to the communication of medication, the marketing side of things as to how you can create awareness within the regulatory environment. I think that's where we're engaging very closely, because obviously for us, the biggest purpose, and that comes back to stigma and education and creating awareness, is around that. Since that's for us at this point the biggest problem, we're very, very closely in contact with the TGA to understand, what can we do, what can't we do, to be as compliant, but also as loud as possible, to make sure that people hear what we have to say and what what can be achieved in this market.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I might hop now for everyone tuning in to the investment opportunity and what's coming up and how that process works, and ask you a few more questions around that, Chris, as well. So for everyone's benefit, we're here on Birchal. We run a crowdsource funding platform. So at the time of the offer being live on Birchal, which I believe is shaping up to be mid-November, but all those who have expressed interest will get email notifications, SMS notifications. You will not be left out, I promise you, when this offer goes live. The information that will be available to you when the offer is open is the offer document, which includes, as I mentioned, the rights associated with your shares, information about the company, the most recent completed financial statements, and the crowdsource funding risk warning. The company constitution will be available to you as well, and the subscription agreement. It is my belief that there may or may not be a draft of the offer document, which is still getting the final touches popped onto it, available to potential investors before the offer goes live. So again, please keep your eye on your emails if that is circulated around. So under the crowdsource funding regulations as well, for everyone's benefit, you're buying into a private company. So you will become a shareholder in Montu, and you'll be holding those shares within a private company. Under the crowdsource funding regulations, we are somewhat restricted, because this is designed for retail investors, to talk about things that could be considered speculative or misleading by the ASIC guidelines that we operate under. So that includes ROI, future financial forecasts, anything that, from ASIC's point of view, we can't sort of make these promises to potential investors. However, that being said, Chris, I know that Montu has some really exciting plans for the future, and that an exit event where investors can divest of their shares and hopefully, fingers crossed, make a return on an investment is in the framework. So, there are so many different ways that one can exit and make a return. There's an ASX listing, there's, selling to a bigger company, undergoing a further capital raise, paying dividends. I know we can't really talk about timelines under the regulations, but broadly, what is Montu's plan for the future, and how do you envisage that investors will receive their return on investment?
Yeah. So for us, it was always, there's multiple routes, as you said, that you can go down. I think in this industry, we believe it's a market that is not going away. It's just at the very, very beginning. And it's something that will shape up in Australia, but also across the world. And so it's a long-term investment into a completely new industry. Think about it the same way as when sort of tech and e-commerce became a thing. This at the very beginning, this was probably your best investment would have been go into Amazon and keep it forever, because it just keeps on growing and it keeps on developing. And I think it's here in the same way. It's a fundamental change in healthcare. It's a fundamental development in the market. And so with that, it's definitely something that we see in the long term. We have no interest in exiting very quickly and or selling out on the business. And therefore, I think the logical route for us is the listing side. Also, I mean, part of the consideration why we go through a crowdfund was obviously because we see there is a very strong community that believes in these medications, that believes in that evolution of the healthcare industry. And so giving them an early access to the company and then being able to, see that company go to listing and then obviously have the ability thereafter to exit once the shares are liquid, what was always our intention. I think we already have, the first 1,100 investors through the first round. Now, probably will add a couple of more thousand to them. So we already have a very good, I think, basis to look at a listing in the future. As you said, I think there's always a couple of variables that you need to take into consideration. What's the best timeline and what's the best timing to do this? From our perspective, it's definitely something where we focus very much on shareholder value. And there's, as I said, so much opportunity in the business that right now, instead of looking at dividends, we're definitely looking at reinvesting those profits that we're making with the business into the growth of the business to further amplify shareholder value, and would look at an opportune time to go for a listing when we feel it's the right time, not only from the sort of where the phase of the development of the business is, but also from the market environment, what maximizes shareholder value in the best possible way. And at that point in time, we will communicate that to market.
And do you envisage further capital raises for Montu between now and a listing on the ASX, if you go down that path?
I think it's probably not too far away, so therefore I don't think so. I think we got the same question last time where we said we might or might not do it. Depends on kind of where the company is. I think looking at how far we have come over the last 12 months, where we are in terms of profitability and efficiency of the business already, and then kind of critical scale. I think for us, it's now getting to a point where we feel we can build a dominant and leading position within the market. And I think at that point in time, there's a good argument as to why a premium would be justifiable in market. And that's sort of the time where we feel that's where you maximize shareholder value, and that's where it's a good time to list.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, for everyone that has been tuning in, there's been a few questions coming through about whether this is a debt or equity purchase. Recapping on the process of investing in a company through a crowdsourced funding platform like Birchal, you will become a fully owned ordinary shareholder in Montu if you invest in this round in return for equity and a very small slice of the company, which is really, really, really exciting. If you are a retail investor, which is basically anyone over the age of 18, you can invest up to $10,000 Australian in this round. If you would like to invest more than $10,000 in this upcoming round with Montu, you will need to provide an accountant certificate providing evidence of wholesale investor status. So if you do have any questions about that, or you'd like a template of that document, please reach out to us at support@birchal.com, use the chat bot on our website, and we will also be putting in our contact details in a follow-up, as well as the Montu team as well, if you have any more questions. I think I've covered most of the questions that have come through the chat at the moment. So very happy, Chris, unless you'd like me to answer a few more, to maybe pause our session there, and thank you very, very much for your time and for everyone's time that's tuned in. And I might pass it over to yourself to wrap up and make any final comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it was a great conversation and great questions that we had today. I definitely think, on our side, it's such an exciting market. It's such a rewarding opportunity to be in this market, and certainly I think with the last 12 months performance that we have seen, it's something quite incredible. I've been working on the investment side for the last 10 years. We're still running our portfolio companies, and it's just so rare that you see significant growth in a very efficient way, and a market that is sort of, from a timing perspective, just ahead of you, so that you're kind of really preparing all that infrastructure for the future. That I really think it's in so many ways such a unique investment opportunity and such a unique space to be in. So really excited, as I said, to do this for many, many more decades as the market really solidifies across the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you again for everyone that tuned in. If you want to be, have your finger on the pulse when this opportunity goes live in mid-November, please express your interest if you haven't already. If you express your interest, you'll be the first to know when the offer goes live, potentially get a draft of the offer document when it is ready to share as well before the offer. And I promise you won't miss out. But if you don't sign up, we won't be able to share those details with you. So thank you so much again for joining us. We'll follow up with some more information on how you can get in touch with both teams if you have further questions. But Chris, again, thank you so much for your time and expertise. It's a really exciting opportunity, and I can't wait to see this successful campaign take off.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thanks so much. Have a good lunchtime, everyone. Bye.